Hello fellow Inquisitors, Split Persona here, and welcome back to another Inquisitor Martyr tutorial guide. Today we are going to be continuing our discussion on the Sisters of Battle class. Today we are discussing the Acts of Faith. Now, the way you access those is, if you look over here on your ship, over here by Metrodora Thame, alright, you go into this. This will give you access to your Acts of Faith. These are level restricted, so you will not be able to unlock all of these until you start leveling up your character. Same with your Saintly Deed, you must level up. Saintly Deeds will come in another episode. Same with Sacred Rites. Today we are just covering the Acts of Faith. The way you equip Acts of Faith is very similar to how the Psyker's psychic abilities and the Tech Adept's construct abilities work. You must equip gear that has a item slot for it. Some of the combo weapons she has will have up to 2. So if you do it correctly, you can get 2 on your weapon. You can get 1 on your Holy Censer. And 1 on your armor. So I would definitely recommend, if you are going to do an Acts of Faith build, definitely go with a route that is going to give you this. There is also a passive skill tree that is an Act of Faith. This one here, it will go and, increase the cooldown timers, reduce the timers on them. It will increase certain effects they have. So if you are going to go into an Acts of Faith build, get the weapons that are going to give you the most slots. Go into this Act of Faith skill tree. Get that up if you can. And make sure you pick the correct Acts of Faith. For this video, I am going to keep it at 3. And the reason for that is this is a channeled weapon that I have here. It's easier because certain of her skills require channeling. So if you have any of her weapons that say channeled on it, like it says there on the right, under Phosphorus Barrage, you're good to go. Phosphorus Barrage is a channeled skill, and it is a very powerful skill. So I would recommend probably not running more than 3. That way you have a good damage output with some other stuff, because these here are going to be your utility items. So let's discuss what they actually are and what they actually do. So the first one we're going to talk about is Fiery Heart. 121 damage of heat. Now, what it is it's on a 30-second cooldown, which can be reduced. 5% chance on dealing heat damage to cause a small burst of flames, dealing 50% damage as heat, and applying a stack of burn on enemies in a 3-meter radius. Now, this one's a little bit hard to show, as you see in the footage in the background. But the way it works is, since this character is mostly about using fire-based weapons, even her Saintly Deeds are all fire-based. This right here gives you a 5% chance that as soon as you apply heat damage, you're going to cause basically a small explosion of flames at your target that's going to deal 50% extra damage And it's going to apply burn to every enemy in a 3-meter radius. It's basically, think of it like a, giving you the 5% chance of a small firebomb going off when you equip this and activate it. Now, it only activates for a few seconds. That is the thing with these. All of these acts of faith are not permanent activations. They are on timers, and they are on cooldowns. So you activate them, they go, and then they expire off their cooldowns. So keep that in mind when you are using these. Basically, Fiery Heart, like I said, it's just basically think of it like a 5% chance when you activate it, that as soon as you activate any sort of heat damage, you apply a extra 50% chance of extra damage, or yeah, a 5% chance of 50% damage on top of it, and you burn enemies in a 3-meter radius. Now, this does stack with DOTs. So any sort of heat DOT or anything like that you got going, that will stack. So keep that in mind. If you are running a purely flame and heat fire base build, you may definitely want Fiery Heart. Her next one is Divine Grace, and this is one that I definitely think all builds need. The Battle Sisters are a little bit squishy. They don't have the best HP, they don't have the best armor, they don't have the best suppression. However, this gives you a free energy shield for 8 seconds. And it's a good energy shield. Divine Grace. Gain energy shield charge equal to 150% of your maximum HP on activation. Passive. After 8 seconds, you lose the shield gained from any source and release a Nova that deals damage based on the lost shield amount. The way this works is it goes and you're basically going to take your shield, activate it before you get into a skirmish, go in, let it whittle down. The more that shield whittles down, the more damage it will inflict in that Nova when it expires after that 8 seconds. So, if you gain an overshield on top of this, you are going to have a tremendous amount of damage that you can put out with just this. This is both a defense and an offense ability if you do it correctly. If you do it just as a defense ability, this works very well. It's not the best, but it will work. So my suggestion is, this is something that needs to be on every build, simply because of the survivability of it. You're going to gain a shield that you can use every 30 seconds. Again, cooldown timers can be reduced. You can go into either skill tree, or you can add perks that will reduce cooldown timers. So, after 8 seconds, of taking damage and all that stuff, all that damage that was inflicted on her shields and that percentage that it dropped will be released in a damaging area of effect. So if you're surrounded by melee opponents, you just activate this, sit there, let them damage you, and then wait for that to pop, and it will kill most of them right off the bat. So, Divine Grace is definitely something I would recommend for everyone to use. Her next one is another good one. Bolts of Retribution. On activation, slows enemies within 20 meters. Also, gain a 25% chance to cause Thunderbolt of Authority for 20 seconds while using channeled skills. Passive, 20% chance for each equipped Act of Faith to cause vulnerability per damage type on hit. Bolts of Retribution is a very good one to have as well. Think of this one again as another defense-offense combined. When you activate this, you're going to slow all the enemies around you within the 20 meters. But you also gain that ability to cause Thunderbolts of Authority, which, in my opinion, is probably one of the best perks the game has ever come up with. I love using Thunderbolts of Authority. But the fact that you can use this without any sort of enchantment or relic or anything like that, you just put it on a slot and you gain the ability to slow enemies. That is huge, because the fact that it automatically slows enemies and you don't have to worry about whether or not they're slowed or not, you can do builds where certain enchantments say does extra damage to slowed enemies. So if you slow a whole group of enemies in a 20-meter radius around you, you can go and use all those enchantments if you're running this. You could run a slow enemy build and release Thunderbolt of Authority on top of it. So if you do it correctly, you could be doing basically the equivalency, if you do it right, of, think of it kind of like almost like a Frost Mage, if you would. You'd have almost the equivalency of slowing your enemies with like a little bit of like a frost effect, and then you have your Thunderbolt of Authority. Think of it like that. That's the best way I can describe this skill. The other passive on it is, for every equipped Act of Faith you have a 20% chance to cause a vulnerability per damage type on hit. That is massive. That is why I said if you were going to do an Acts of Faith build, you need to have 3. Because you just took that passive from 20% to 60. 60% chance to cause a vulnerability per damage type on hit if you run 3, because it stacks. So if you do it correctly, almost every hit you do will apply a vulnerability stack, depending on what type of damage you're dealing. And if the Thunderbolt of Authority hits them, that as well is going to apply vulnerability to them, as is the slow. So this Bolts of Retribution, in my opinion, is extremely good for setting up a very, very good build. So that is those. I'm going to switch out to the next 3, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so the next 3 we're going to talk about are Stoic Endurance, Ardent Onslaught, and Expurgation Sweep. Stoic Endurance. Gain 10% Reflect chance and 100% Reflect damage, along with 10% all resistance for 10 seconds on activation. In exposed state, gain an additional 20% supreme damage reduction and 2% HP regeneration per second. This is a purely survivability act of faith. The way it works is it's basically going to give you basically damage reflection and basically damage reduction. If you activate this, you're going to, any damage you take, 10% of that is going to have a chance of getting reflected back. And 100% of that damage is going to be reflected back then. So if an enemy hits you for 1,000 damage, there's a 10% chance that they're going to get that damage reflected back to them. Which, most of the time, most enemies will hit you harder than they have HP. So chances are it's going to kill them outright if they get that damage reflected back to them. Now, once you get up to the heavier levels, then this starts to taper out a little bit. You're also going to gain a 10% all resist for 10 seconds. That is actually very helpful. So between the 10% reflect chance and the 10% all resist, this is a very good defense. Also, if you're in an exposed state, you will gain a 20% additional supreme damage reduction, which means your damage reduction is even going to be higher. And you will gain health regeneration. This is a very, very big, like I said, just defense and survivability buff. Again, this is a cooldown ability. You can reduce the cooldown timer, through skills and the passive tree, but this does not cost resource. It does not cost a mod slot. It does not cost a item. This is just one of your passives. So you want to build something for damage reflection and stuff like that, Stoic Endurance would be one for you. Ardent Onslaught. Gain enrage tokens equal to the number of enemies within 5 meters on activation. Passive. Plus 15% attack speed if the character has at least 5 enrage tokens. If you're doing an enrage token build, this is a must, because this will give you instant tokens, and it has a 10-second cooldown, which can be reduced. You can create infinite tokens. However, this is a little bit different. If you look over here, out of all the things, this one has a cost. This one takes some of your HP. 1,000 of it. So, make sure you do not overspam this. You can kill yourself with this ability. You can completely kill yourself with this. You can overuse it if you are not careful and completely just wipe and kill yourself and fail your mission. So, be very cautious when you're using this. My suggestion, wait until you get a large group of enemies. All of them very close to you, preferably large group of melee. Activate this, because it only costs 1,000 on activation, not per enemy. Keep that in mind. It's 1,000 for activation. If you have, 20 enemies around you, and you activate this, that is 20 enrage tokens. So keep that in mind. You do not want to spam this. You will kill yourself, because this will cost 1,000 HP every time. But the reason for that is you're getting enraged tokens every time you activate this with enemies nearby. And it's got a 10-second cooldown. This is a very, very powerful skill if you're doing an enraged token build. So my suggestion, wait until you get a large group of enemies, activate it, use it, make sure if you're going to use this skill, you have some sort of health regen ability on your character. If not, you will not be able to recover that 1,000 points of health, and you may forget about it, and you may wipe. So be very careful with this one. It's a very powerful one, but this is the only one that, in addition to the cooldown, has a cost. It's not a resource, it is your health. So keep that in mind. Expurgation Sweep. Pull up to 10 enemies within 9 meters into melee range. Also, two-handed melee attacks deal 50% splash damage in a 5-meter radius for 12 seconds. Passive plus 15% supreme movement speed. This is a skill that I would definitely recommend using if you are going to be building for melee. If you're going range, I would not recommend this. As you can see in the video that I did, I had on a AoE cone ability around me. Was not the best weapon for this. If you're going to use this ability, I would highly, highly recommend going straight up melee. One, because you're going to be pulling everything around you into melee range. But you're also going to be gaining that splash damage bonus for any sort of two-handed melee. So I would definitely recommend go melee if you're going to use this. You know, this goes hand in hand with it. You're also going to be gaining a movement speed, which is huge. 15% movement speed. You could technically just use this ability just for the movement speed if you wanted to. It is highly possible just to ignore the whole pull enemies into range and stuff, and just ignore all the other abilities like the increased melee damage and all that stuff, just to gain that extra movement speed. That 15% movement speed stacks on top of all your other passives for movement speed. So if you're trying to do a speed run of something, like a Void Crusade or something like that, Expurgation Sweep is definitely something that you would want, because you could use that as an instant speed boost on a cooldown timer. And here's the thing, it lasts for 12 seconds, which is half the time, pretty much, of your 34-second cooldown without any of the reductions. If you've got reductions, you're going to be going well over half of that time frame. So more than half of the time, you are going to be on a 15% extra supreme movement speed. So keep that in mind. It's not a regular movement speed. This is supreme movement speed. So if you wanted to build for speed, you could bypass the whole melee damage and pulling enemies in and all that, and just use this to boost your movement. This is a very, very handy ability to have if you're trying to do speedrunning. I would definitely recommend, if you're going to do a speedrun build, use this. So that is those three. Next, we are going to take on the last two. Okay. And the last 2 acts of faith that she has are Perfervid Fury and Wrath of the Penitent. Perfervid Fury deals heat damage to the character over time, equal to 12% of your maximum HP. Deals equal damage as heat to enemies in a 4.5 meter radius. The damage taken is reduced by resistance, but the unmitigated damage is still dealt to enemies. Passive. Regain 5% of your missing HP every second when the Act of Faith is not active. This one here is a very interesting skill. When you activate this, this will basically cause your character to burn. However, you will also burn every enemy around you. The damage taken is going to go down if they do have a resistance, but they are still going to take that amount of damage. So they'll still take it even if it's not a heat damage. They'll still take raw damage. So it will still really damage them. However, as you can see in the video I just did, you are going to, if you're not careful, die. You have to be very, very careful. Just like Ardent Onslaught, where it costs HP to activate, this one here is something similar, but this one is, think of this like the ultimate DOT. You are going to be dealing the most DOT ever with this, but you are also going to be dealing DOT to yourself. So if you are not careful, you are going to go and absolutely just flat out kill yourself. So make sure that you are going and keeping, you know, a ton of your health on standby. Make sure you do not activate it, you know, just whenever. You have to make sure that when you do activate this, you are at full health. Because if not, it's going to take, you know, 12% of your maximum HP over time. This is on top of enemies dealing damage to you. So, if the enemies are dealing damage to you, guess what? They're going to be whittling your health down. You're going to be taking the heat damage. You will die very, very quickly. So, the other side of this is that if you don't activate this skill ever, you will constantly gain health regeneration. Always. It is a passive of this skill. You will gain 5% of your missing HP every second. That right there is a huge survivability buff. So, if you can survive the initial onslaught of this activation, you will kill everything around you, and then you will most likely gain everything back within just a few seconds. It does not take long with this ability. Like I said, 5% of your missing HP every second does not seem like a lot, but it does add up. So, I don't recommend activating this skill unless you're in dire need and you know you can survive. But the passive, where you passively gain HP when it's not active, is very nice. I would definitely recommend it just for the HP regeneration ability on some of your higher level missions where you know you're going to take some damage. So this, just for that skill, or that passive alone, is very good. Wrath of the Penitent. Gain a Berserk token on activation for each 3% of your missing HP. For 25 seconds, melee skills inflict bleed. And applying 5 stacks of bleed to an enemy instantly applies 5 stacks of heat vulnerability to them. Passive, 50% bonus damage to bleed effects. 10% of melee damage converted to heat. If you are going to be doing a melee build, this is one I would highly recommend keeping on at all times, simply because of the passive. 50% bonus damage to bleed effects. Most of your melee weapons are going to have a bleed effect, okay? And that 10% of melee damage converted to heat is huge. May not seem like it, but it will add up. And it will, if you do it right, considering how she is with any of her other heat skills and all that other stuff, will deal a lot of damage in the long run. But the fact that you're gaining a Berserk token on activation when you lose health, if you combine that with Ardent Onslaught, where you lose 1,000 HP and you gain Enrage tokens when enemies are within, 5 meters. The reason they're going to be within 5 meters is one of 2 reasons. Either A, you're surrounded by melee opponents, or B, you are the melee opponent. So my suggestion is combine Wrath of the Penitent with Ardent Onslaught, lose the HP on Ardent Onslaught activation, and then activate Wrath of the Penitent to gain that extra Berserk token. Then your melee skills inflict bleed, and once you apply 5 stacks of bleed to an enemy, you instantly apply 5 stacks of heat vulnerability to them, on top of dealing bonus bleed damage and bonus heat damage to them. So this is a very, very good melee skill to have. Very easy cooldown, you can very easily go and have it on there. But I would say that is it for the video. As far as what I would recommend for building, every build should have, in my opinion, either Divine Grace or Stoic Endurance. Stoic Endurance is going to give you the Reflect chance and Reflect damage, as well as Supreme damage reduction. Divine Grace is going to give you the Energy Shield. Energy shields, in my opinion, tend to work a little bit better. So I normally tend to go with Divine Grace. My ultimate suggestion is, if you're going to be building for melee, the 3 skills you are going to want are Ardent Onslaught, Expurgation Sweep, and Wrath of the Penitent if you're going melee build. Everything else will work for range. If you want to throw on either Bolts of Retribution for slowing enemies and adding that chance for Thunderbolt of Authority, you can. Divine Grace will give you an energy shield, but I would say you're definitely going to want at least 2 of either Ardent Onslaught Expurgation Sweep, or Wrath of the Penitent, depending on how you're dealing damage. If you're doing a bleed build, Wrath of the Penitent. If not, go with either Expurgation Sweep, or if you're going with Enrage tokens, go with Ardent Onslaught. That is my suggestion for a complete melee build. If you're doing ranged heat builds, because this is what this character is designed for, is heat, Fiery Heart is definitely a must, because there's that 5% chance that you're going to cause that 50% extra damage explosion, causing instant burn on every enemy within 3-meter radius around that target. So that is a instant must as well. Bolts of Retribution, again, something I would definitely recommend for a ranged character, simply because if enemies get close to you, you can activate this. If you have melee characters or melee enemies get close, activate this. It'll slow them down around you. You'll also activate a very good defense in the form of the Thunderbolts of Authority, okay, as well as it being an offense, and it will go and use it as a range ability. Plus, you'll also be able to cause vulnerabilities per damage type on hit. I would not recommend Perfervid Fury. If somebody can go and figure out a good build for that, let me know down in the comments. I've looked at how this functions, at least on my own. Now, granted, I have not had a chance to actually build with this. I don't like the fact of how it leaves you vulnerable. The only way I could see it working is, A, you would need a very, very tanky shield. Not one provided by Divine Grace, because Divine Grace takes it away after 8 seconds and releases it in that Nova. You would need just a regular shield. If you had a good shield where you were not losing health to enemy fire, you could use Perfervid Fury, dealing constant DOT damage and then just gaining that health back while your shield absorbed damage. If you could do it that way, that would work. But without a good, strong shield, I don't see this working other than that. You need that very strong shield in order for this to work. So, those are her acts of faith. And those are, like I said, those are just my opinions on how I have seen that they play so far. If anyone has any suggestions or ideas of how, or even how they've figured out how they make play a little bit different, just write down in the comments. I am always open to, you know, new ideas, or even just, you know, knowing something else that, you know, maybe you've come across something that I haven't. So if you have any other information, you know, share it. If I don't use it, I'm sure somebody else will. So, you know, don't be afraid to share it with others. But that is going to be it for this episode. So, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, subscribe. And I will see you all in the next episode. Have a good day.